On today's episode of Locked On 76ers, Keith and I talk about the tough Atlantic Division. Yes, the Philadelphia 76ers, with the rest of the teams, they're pretty good. All of them could be playoff teams. How tough is it? Who stands out? Who's the toughest opponent for the 76ers as we get ready for this upcoming campaign? We'll dive into it next right here, Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, you are Locked On 76ers. I'm Devon Givens from 97.5 The Fanatic Radio in Philadelphia, alongside my co-host and partner from theinquirer.com, Sixers beat writer Keith Pompey. Keith, what's going on, man? How was the weekend?
It was great, man. It was great. What's up with you?
Not much, man. Another weekend of football, getting ready for the home team here this Monday night, and we'll see how the rest of the division. Giants won, Washington lost, Cowboys eked one out themselves. So Philadelphia Eagles need to make sure they stay on track and keep up with the undefeated New York Giants at this time.
2 games, bro. 2 games.
Hey, man, it's only 17 of them.
Yeah,
you're right. What you got to do. We thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On 76ers is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, like right here on YouTube at Locked On 76 as well. Keith, as we get closer and closer, a week away from Media Day for us next week, as the 76ers will have Media Day a week from today, next Monday in Camden at the practice facility. Always an interesting day. And as we get closer and closer, we focus on so many other things. We'll start to dive into so many other different topics and ideas as we go along as training camp gets underway. But I wanted to dive into the division a little bit. We've talked about the overall scope of the Eastern Conference, but we haven't really focused on the Atlantic Division. Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Brooklyn, and Toronto, all playoff-worthy caliber teams, at least based on what New York has done 2 years ago, making the playoffs this past year, falling short, but going out there and making a big move for Jalen Brunson. And their idea is to make sure that they get into the postseason. So with it, Keith, and we look at it, and how do you view this one here with the Atlantic Division and how tough it is for the Philadelphia 76ers to come out on top, and how realistic do you believe it is for them to win this division?
I mean, well, you know what? I mean, they can win it, but, right now I look at, this division, in my opinion, is the toughest division. The second one would probably be the Central Division, right now. And the reason why I say it's the toughest is because, I think 4 to 5 teams right there are going to be playoff contenders, with 3 of the teams probably being in the 3 of the top 5 teams, right? And then you could argue like 4 of them could be 4 of the top 6, right? The 4 teams. So you got Boston, the Sixers, the Toronto Raptors, and the Brooklyn Nets. I have all 4 of those teams making the playoffs, and the Knicks being a team that doesn't make it. But here's the thing. When you look at it, we're talking about tough. I think the Boston Celtics are the best team in the East. And I think that, they're probably going to stand in the 76ers way. And then you look at the Brooklyn Nets, and the Brooklyn Nets are a team that has the potential to be the best team. We just don't know, what Brooklyn Net team is going to show up from a mental standpoint. So, it's one of those things right now. I think that, yes, the Sixers I got them regarded as the 3rd best team in the East, but at the same time, I feel like they're going to have a tough time winning that division. And the good thing is like, hey, people don't really go by that anymore. They just go by number 1 through 8 in the Eastern Conference standings. But I do look at the Boston Celtics being the best team in the Atlantic Division.
Now, even with Boston, yes, having a pretty good offseason with Malcolm Brogdon, Danilo Gallinari, but unfortunately he's out with the ACL. Does it kind of tip the scales a little bit where that's a big pickup for Malcolm Brogdon, obviously. But we also thought that with the addition of Danilo Gallinari, that put them really at the top to remain there. But without Gallinari and not having yet replaced him with another free agent acquisition or even via a trade, does that give the Sixers, as you said, they could win this division? Does it keep them a little bit closer to the Boston Celtics for that crown of the Atlantic Division?
I don't think so. I mean, I
Yeah.
like. I mean, I think the Sixers are going to be in the mix. You don't get me wrong, but I still think that, I know Boston lost Gallinari for whenever he returns. It probably could be a season-ending one, right? Who knows, right? Who knows? But at the same time, I just think that Boston is so young. They were dealing with injuries. They were dealing with the COVID situation. I feel like if Boston comes in focus with those guys, they're going to be great. The one thing that they missed out on last year, the weakness was, you can argue, was a starting point guard position. Yes, Marcus Smart played that, but at the same time, he's not really a point guard. You know what I mean? So I think with Malcolm Brogdon and running a point is going to enable Marcus Smart to do other things. And I just think that they're just going to be deeper. I mean, when we look at the front court, the front court guys were injured, banged up all year. I just feel like the Boston Celtics are way younger than the Sixers, and it's a talented group with a lot of confidence, being as though that they made it to the finals. Now, that can also, overconfidence could hurt the Celtics, but at the same time, I feel as though that the Celtics are number one, the Sixers are number two, and Brooklyn number three.
I don't disagree with that, but before we move on to Brooklyn and the other teams, then if Malcolm Brogdon is going to be a starter, which he has been for the duration of his career, who's coming off the bench for Boston? Is it Robert Williams, Al Horford? Because you already have those two guards in Smart and Brogdon. Then you have Brown and Tatum, and you only have room for one more if that's Al Horford or Robert Williams. Now, that's their problem, but we're talking about it because it could be the rest of the Atlantic Division's problem, including the 76ers. So who would your candidate be to come off the bench? Is it still Robert Williams and you start Al Horford?
That's a really tough one, but because right now is one of those things where, I think a lot of it will depend on how Horford looks like when he comes back, But I would think that, and also I think that you're looking at a Boston Celtics team that where, if all these guys buy in, you could say we have six starters. Like, for instance, when the Boston Celtics play the Sixers, okay, you're going to have Al Horford and you're going to have Robert Williams out there, right? You know what I mean? But if they play another team, then Robert Williams could slide to the five or whatever, and then they can have like a smaller lineup. The thing about it is they're so flexible, and like where you look at a guy like Jason Tatum, who at times, he's a three, but at times he plays the four. You know what I mean? He excels at that. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tough situation that Boston has to deal with. But at the same time, it's a great situation because you have so many versatile players. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that part will be interesting for our second-year head coach, Emi Udoka, and how he structures that lineup for the starting five. At least we know that's not the all-important part of things, but they have some talented players. Boston, I agree with you. Who's the next best outside of Brooklyn? We'll decide. We'll just talk about that on the other side and figure out who the next best competition is in the Atlantic Division as we focus on this one on the Locked On 76ers podcast. We'll get into that next right here on Locked On 76ers. As we do that, I got to tell you and talk to you about wasting money. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? We know how difficult it is to find which ones are your favorites. You have so many of them, so you spend money here, you drop a few bucks here, you load up on them all. 80% of people have subscriptions they've simply forgot about. Maybe for you, it's an unused Amazon Prime account or a Hulu account that never gets streamed. You forgot the password. That's how long it has been since you have used it. Well, there's this great app I use that helps me track all of my expenses. And because of it, I no longer waste money on subscriptions I don't even use. You might have heard of it. It's called Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. We've talked about this in the past. They have a new name, Rocket Money. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. It has already helped me out with the name that we formerly use. And it's certainly going to help me out with this one right here to keep track of these subscriptions. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Do it today, people. Do it today.
Definitely do it.
We're getting into the fall, getting into the holiday season. Every $5 counts. All right. Okay. You don't want to get there. $5 here, $5 there. Next thing you know, that extra $35, whatever it might be, at the end of the year for those socks that you're giving away for Christmas. All right. Thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. I got to ask you, who would be the surprise team in the Atlantic Division for you, Keith? If we are to believe that Boston is up at the top, Brooklyn will be right behind the Sixers or contending with the Sixers until we really have a good idea of what that team looks like with their new structure, with Ben Simmons in the mix and a few other additions from this offseason and all the turmoil that they have to deal with this offseason. If they are ready to go and they're going to be the best version of the Brooklyn Nets, who else between Toronto and New York would you look at as a surprise team in the Atlantic Division? I think we'll have the same one, but I figured I'd ask you.
I mean, if I don't think New York, I don't think New York has enough firepower right now. You know, I just don't.
I agree with you.
I don't. But you know, it's funny because that's a great question, but I don't think Toronto's going to be a surprise. I think the Raptors are going to be a good team. You know, I feel like, you know, the Raptors team, and nothing against the Sixers, nothing against them, but I feel like the Sixers got the Raptors at the right time in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like they had some injuries and Scotty Barnes was banged up. Fred VanVleet wasn't himself, right? And I feel like, yes, the Sixers were the better team, but I feel like that team is scary. I mean, we look at the length that they had. We looked at the versatility and all these guys can play. And, you know, yes, they're not as individually talented as the Sixers stars power I'm talking about, as Brooklyn, as Boston. But I think that when you throw out all those 6'9" and 6'10" guys who can play a lot of different positions, and then you have the shooters and Gary Trent, you know, Jr. and Fred VanVleet, you know, I feel like that's going to be a dangerous team. So some people may say they're going to be a surprise. I don't really see it that way, but at the same time, you know, I do feel like that they're going to be once the playoffs come, they're going to be a tough out.
I do too. Like how they play, very well coached by Nick Nurse, as we saw with that first round matchup against the Sixers. As you mentioned, those crazy lineups that they can throw out there with Scotty Barnes handling a lot of the defensive responsibilities on the best wing player, maybe on the point guard, give a little break to Fred VanVleet. And you talk about the shooting from Gary Trent and Fred VanVleet as well. And then Pascal Siakam is a former All-Star. So they have a lot of good things there. And Thaddeus Young seemed like he fit in well there coming off the bench, having their center position. Chris Boucher coming off the bench. They have a lot of stuff. And they run a very different type of offense. They run a different, unique defensive sets that they have there that really give a lot of teams trouble, including the 76ers. So they are going to be a tough out for sure. And you're right. They're not a surprise. Many people already know who they are because of Nick Nurse and those other players that have established themselves as all-stars in terms of VanVleet and Siakam, and then the other role players that they do have on the team that makes them so good. So, and with New York, you're right, man. Even with Jalen Brunson, that's why I didn't want him to go there. Just as a fan of his game, felt like Dallas was still the place for him. Going to New York, he could make me look foolish in saying this. I just think it's the wrong spot because while I like R.J. Barrett a little bit and Julius Randle the same thing, that team just really doesn't do anything for me where I think that they can really compete, not only in the Atlantic, but also in the Eastern Conference with so many other teams. It's about 9-10 teams in the East and a few others that they're going to be battling with outside of the usual 4 that we talk about, or 5 with Milwaukee, Miami, and Brooklyn with the Sixers and Boston. There are only 3 more spots. And yes, there's a play-in, and then they have that midseason tournament and all that they can really hit a groove and get going. But I just don't look at them as a team right now from afar that I'm worried about, really. They're going to compete. They're going to give you some tough nights. They're going to be a tough out on any given night during the 82-game schedule. But But as far as the postseason goes, I just don't see them as a team that I'm all that concerned about.
Nah, you're right. Because like you talked about the other teams, like you said, Milwaukee, Chicago, then Cleveland, right?
I didn't
And
even mention Cleveland.
you didn't
I
even
mentioned
mention Cleveland.
Miami
That's what I'm saying. You didn't mention Cleveland.
or
And then,
Atlanta.
so then you got Miami, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Now the thing about Charlotte's a young team, and I know like we talk about playing,
The
but
tough part with them is no Miles Bridges.
yeah,
That's
no Miles Bridges. They have, yeah, you're right, no Miles Bridges. But at the same time, those young guys they got, the other ones are good, are good. And then the coach that they have is a hell of a coach. You know what I mean?
Clifford
So
backfield
yeah,
second
Clifford is,
round.
yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Mhm.
So to me, it's like, but when I look at it, so like, yes, no Miles Bridges. But when I look at the Knicks, I'm saying to myself, are they better than Charlotte right now?
We
Like,
forgot
I mean,
Chicago too. Yeah.
yeah, nah, they're not better than Chicago. I don't
Nope.
think so.
Nope.
Nah,
I'm
you know
just
what I
saying
mean?
we forgot them as one
Yeah,
of the
we
teams.
forgot about it. Yeah, so that's the hard part for the
Hmm.
Knicks.
Yeah,
That's the hard part.
absolutely. And with all those teams, Keith, again, we feel the Sixers have a good chance to compete in the East and maybe at least make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. Who knows? We'll figure that all out as the season goes along. In our final segment, we wanted to talk about this too, as we speak about all those teams and all the talent that's there in the East, including the talented players that the Knicks have. We need to talk about All Stars. How many do the Sixers have? Do they have two, one, three, four, maybe? Who knows? We'll talk about it on the other side. Final segment right here. Locked on 76ers. Welcome back to Locked on 76ers. Devon Givens, Keith Pompey with you here on this Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend as we get closer and closer to the media day portion of things for the NBA starting a week from today. Keith, in February will be the All-Star game this season. It will be in Utah, where they need some excitement. And I guess this is what it will be. The All-Star game will be February, second weekend of February. As always, it will be in Utah this year. And Joel Embiid has made the All-Star team 5 consecutive seasons as a starter. And James Harden has also made the All-Star team 4 consecutive years. He's a 10-time All-Star, so 10 consecutive years. James Harden has made the All-Star game and played in that weekend. They don't have any others, from Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey, PJ Tucker, on and on and on, all these names that the Sixers do have. Tobias Harris, I thought, should have made it a couple of seasons ago. The last season that Ben Simmons made it, thought Tobias Harris was worthy of that by the midpoint of the season. Has not made it yet. And same with Tyrese Maxey. So do they have more than one All-Star on this team come February?
I mean, they have one in a possible, in my opinion. I mean, they have one in a possible, and the thing is, the reason why they have a possible is because in the past you would always pencil. I mean, the one definite is Joel. In the past, you would always say that James Harden, you would just pencil him in. But I feel like that, and right now going into the season, you will say like, okay, a lot of people think they saw the videos, they saw whatever, they say, okay, he's an all-star, right? But if he comes out and he plays like he did in the playoffs, and he might be a facilitator, but if he struggles to blow by people and do things like that, um, he may not make it. And the reason being is, I mean, you look at a guy like Donovan Mitchell who's coming there now, and in the East, he's going to make the All-Star team. There are like the good thing is, the one thing that might help him out is that guys like Jimmy Butler and DeMar DeRozan, they're listed as forwards, right? But Atlanta, I mean, and I don't know if he's on Harden's level, but DeJounte Murray was an all-star too. So you got Trey Young, now you got Bradley Beal back. You have Kyrie. I just think that there's a lot of guards right now.
Yeah,
Kyle Lowry.
yeah,
So he really has to ball out. I mean, you know what, he can you know he can he, it could be one of those things where what he can do is he can basically lead the lead in assists. And if that happens, people are like, okay, he reinvented himself, and he's like this guy, and he can make it. But outside of that, man, I feel like if his shot isn't there, it's going to be tough for him just because of all the other people that are there. Now, again, that's if his shot struggles. If he struggles, that's if he doesn't look any better than he did. Now, if he comes out and he's like found the fountain of youth, so to speak, then there's an opportunity. I mean, there's a chance that he will make it. But the only definite I see is Joel.
Yeah, I agree with you. He will be voted in by the fans like he has been. And as far as James Harden goes, you're absolutely right. In order for him to make it in, the coach is going to have to vote him in as a reserve, and he's going to have to go out there and hoop and be a spectacular compared to those other players that you just mentioned. Now with DeJounte Murray and Donovan Mitchell coming from the Western Conference, the remaining players that are already here that are All-Star worthy. Jalen Brunson, you never know. Like Jalen Brunson could go out there and be the 20-point scorer for that Knicks team that's keeping them in the mix and be worthy of an All-Star spot.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know. LaMelo Ball has already put himself in that conversation since he made it a season ago. So you're 100% right, man. And there are only so many spots, and I'm with you. I think it's going to be tough for Tyrese Maxey to make it this soon. And I think Tobias Harris is, fair or unfair. I think that time may have passed just because of what Harden does versus what Simmons used to do. I think it was easier for Harris to make it on the All-Star team if that was, with Ben Simmons, because now we have to, for his sake, and I really do think he was worthy of it in 20, that All-Star berth and his first time. Tyrese Maxey is probably going to be the one that gets that look as that first time All-Star in the event that he goes out there and just takes that next step. So I agree with you. There's one definite and a few questions with the others. Good players. And in the end, I'm sure that they all want to make the All-Star team. Who wouldn't? But in the end, the big deal is simply to win the championship and get to the finals and win the championship. But it's always nice to be represented in the game by your players. And right now, I agree with you. I think there's one for sure in Embiid and question mark for James Harden and the others. Yep. So I'm with you, man. I'm right there with you. So I agree with you 100%. And I've got to say this, though, Keith, before we step away and get ready to go out for the day and enjoy the rest of our Monday. We got to thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen. Now go and make the NBA Top 50 on Locked On NBA your second listen. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Locked On and the Bet Online odds makers present the NBA Top 50 most valuable players. Find it on Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. I apologize for that, my slip up. Find it on Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Well, with that, Keith, let everybody know where they can find us.
You know what? Like my man D said, wherever you get your podcast, you can also get the Locked On 76ers podcast. So, and then if you want to get this YouTube channel, go to YouTube, Locked On 76ers. And when you see that Liberty Bell, click on that Liberty Bell and you become our newest subscriber. And you need to listen to my man's show. You can find D on the Divine Giving Show. Yes, he has his own show, and it's from tradition. Normally, it's from 6
all over the place,
but it's all over the place. But normally, it's from 6 to 10 on 97.5 FM. ESPN channel, right? You can also follow him on Twitter at Divine Givens. No, I'm sorry, I messed up. You can find him on Twitter at Divine G975. You can follow me on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers, and you can read my stuff in Enquirer.com.
Well, listen, man, it's always fun, man. We'll be back tomorrow as we get closer and closer again to the start of Sixers training camp and media day for us on the 26th. Keith, thanks, man. Really appreciate it as always. We appreciate everybody checking us out every Monday through Friday. Less than 30 minutes, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Thanks, Keith.
Deuces, man. Peace.
Yes, sir.